So Trump has referred to Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, as a dictator. And there's a lot of debate going around, is he a dictator, is he not? And a lot of it hinges on legal interpretations of the Ukrainian constitution. But I kind of want to take a step back and look at this in a more meta-political perspective. That is, what even is a dictator? And a lot of people will probably say, well, that's obvious. There's a definition of it that you could look up. And while that is technically true, the term dictator, and I'm not sure if there's a term for this, if it's new think or double think or new speech or whatever, is a term that's used in a non-standard way, but carries the benefits of its previous association. So you have the term dictator as the average person would understand it, as a textbook or dictionary or university political science, at least back during the 2000s. I'm not sure if it's changed since I was in school, would refer to it as. It is a technical descriptive term with some negative connotations. But if you're looking at it from a dictionary or political science perspective, there's at least an attempt to have some actual measurements of it. So we're going to look at Merriam-Webster. The definition of dictator, according to this, is a person, this was back from ancient Rome, a person granted absolute emergency power, one holding complete autocratic control, a person with unlimited governmental power, one ruling in an absolute and often oppressive way. And if you go through it, pretty much all of those are the same. A person who has complete power in a country and has not been elected by the people. A person who gives orders and behaves as if they have complete power. So when people hear the word dictator, that is the definition that they think of. And it also is meant to conjure up associations with Mao or Pol Pot or Hitler or Mussolini or Saddam Hussein or any number of other infamous figures throughout history. I would argue, though, that that is not the way in which it is used in a political sense, particularly by the media. I don't think it even necessarily has that close an association. And the more you go into what the intelligentsia and the media consider to be dictatorships and not dictatorships, the more you realize that that really isn't the case, and it means something completely different. However, like I said, when people say dictator and they mean it in the media, intelligentsia, political class way, they're relying on the fact that people are giving the association of the kind of standard way of saying it. Once again, I'm not sure if there's a specific term for that, but hopefully that makes sense. You can follow what I'm talking about. So what does the term dictator mean? I would posit that the term dictator refers to whether or not someone is in the in-group or out-group. I think it's an identity term. I think it's an alignment term. I don't think it's a technical term in the way that it's generally used. I would argue that a dictator is, in the common definition, someone who implements illiberal policies or has illiberal interests. One could also say it's someone who is opposed in one way or another to the political and social agenda of the left within the collective West. I don't think it really has anything to do with rights, whatever that means, or freedom, or democracy, or popular sovereignty, or anything like that. I think it generally refers to whether somebody is part of your in-group or is part of your out-group. And beyond that, there really isn't a coherent definition. So let's just maybe take a step back and go through what I mean exactly. The idea that a dictator is someone who's not elected or doesn't enjoy popular support is completely false if you start to look at who is called a dictator and who's not called a dictator. I've said this many times, but Putin is called a dictator. The media also calls Bukele a dictator and Viktor Orban a dictator. Now, I don't think there's any real doubt that these men hold the support of either a majority or at least a significant plurality of the population. Bukele, for instance, won the presidential election with 85% of the vote, yet he is still commonly referred to as a dictator in the media and by the Western political elite. Likewise, well, I will be the first to admit Russia probably doesn't have what we would consider free or fair elections. I don't think there is any doubt that Putin enjoys the majority support of his population, and then if a completely free and fair election was held, he would easily win. It should be noted that Putin's approval rating was something like twice Biden's. I forget the exact numbers, but Putin had like a 75 to 80% approval rating, depending on the poll, including from Western polls, and Biden's was like in the 30s or something like that. So once again, you have to ask the question, okay, if Biden is democratically elected, yet despised by most of his country, but Putin is not democratically elected and enjoys the support of his country, then is popular sovereignty really that important when it comes to whether or not someone is a dictator? A more recent example, if you look at the United States, a lot of people on the left are calling Donald Trump a dictator, despite the fact that he won the election. I have seen some people argue, although it's not as big now as it used to be, that he cheated and the election was rigged and that he was not legitimately elected. I've also seen the argument that he only won because of the Electoral College, even though he won the popular vote as well, and therefore he's not the legitimate leader of the United States. And this is a trend you can see in a lot of different cases in which the media and the political left have tried to delegitimize or outright remove people who have won a clear popular mandate in what's generally considered a mostly free and fair election, or a fully free and fair election, and they will argue that that does not give the person any kind of legitimacy to rule. More close to home, when Rob Ford won the mayoral election, the media immediately said, and the left said, we will not allow him to finish his term. We will find some way to take away his power or remove him from office because we don't like him. And he is a dictator because he doesn't do the things that we want him to do. And once again, like, the more you go into it and you start looking at a lot of the countries that have undergone attempted color revolutions, oftentimes they will have an elected government. Now, there might be corruption in the system, but as best as one can determine, given the electoral system within the country, they will be attempting to overthrow a democratically elected government that enjoys a popular mandate. Another recent example is the repeated attempts to overthrow Georgia Dream in Georgia, despite it having the backing of the Georgian people and winning, if I recall, by quite a sizable majority in an election. The same thing happened in Slovakia, where Robert Fico and the other Socialist Party won and entered into a coalition. That is not considered to be democratic. And I can't recall his name, but that guy in the Romanian presidential election came in first place, and the election was canceled because he won. So it's the idea that popular sovereignty has anything to do with whether or not someone is a dictator. I don't think it really does. A lot of countries like France or Germany have changed their electoral systems to make it less representative. Like in the case of France, it's deliberately set up so the National Rally can never gain power, and so that the more kind of centrist parties will always get a majority of the vote, or at least get a disproportionately large percentage of the vote. It's specifically set up that way to be an anti-majoritarian or a counter-majoritarian style of government. So let's move on to the other things, and these are some things that conservatives are saying about why Zelensky is a dictator. Repression of freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and other fundamental freedoms. What this has to do with whether or not a country is a dictatorship, I'm not really sure, because I'd say most countries that the media considers to be democracies undergo this. Some countries, like the United Kingdom, are extremely repressive when it comes to any kind of speech, any kind of public participation. As Vance pointed out, in Scotland, it's illegal to pray against abortion in your own home. Yet the United Kingdom is considered a democracy and is often rated, if you ever see Freedom House or any of these other organizations near the top, the UK is also rated as having one of the freest presses in the world. The country that I live in, Canada, has extrajudicial tribunals that can convict people without due process and give any kind of punishment literally that they want. And Justo is trying to bring in a bill that would allow people to be put in jail for a lifetime without parole if they say something online that the Canadian government disagrees with. And yet Canada is a democracy. Britain is a democracy. There's similar things in Sweden, France, a lot, Australia, a lot of countries. So severe, even punishing restrictions on freedom of speech and conscience and expression don't have anything to do with whether a country is a democracy or not. From my understanding, and there was an older study that I think is not relevant anymore, but from what I've seen, the UK has a lot more people in jail for political reasons than Russia does, or indeed a lot of dictatorships do. At least for social media posting. But some Western countries, like I said, like the UK, do arrest people probably at a higher rate for their political views than most dictatorships do. As a slight digression, I would argue that in a lot of cases, freedom of speech is at least better defined, I think, in China and Russia, as I think it's more widely understood what you can and can't say. Like, you can't question Putin's legitimacy. You can't question the Chinese government's rule over of China. But outside of certain politically prescribed things that are fairly clear, you can say and do a lot of stuff. It's a lot more defined, whereas I think in Western countries, it's a lot more arbitrary, and it's based on that particular judge or that particular public official or that particular company on that particular day. So my point is that restrictions on protesting, on freedom of speech, and stuff like that, it really has nothing to do with whether a country is a dictatorship or not. Freedom of religion, people have pointed out that Zelensky has shut down a couple different churches in Ukraine. I mean, governments do that all the time in the West. I don't really see how that's indicative of, well, pretty much anything to do with something's a democracy or dictatorship or not. So the more you go through this and the more you look at particularly the UK, because I think it's probably the best example of this, but also Canada, the United States, and a lot of other European countries, and you compare them, the so-called democracy countries, to so-called dictatorships, you see that there's not really a coherent way of determining how they differ beyond, you could argue, theoretically it works one way, or if you look at the Constitution, or if you look at the laws, or some societies tend to be more violent than others and the government tends to be more violent. But ultimately, I don't think there really is a definition of what a dictatorship and what a democracy is, other than just defining what the in-group or out-group is. A democracy is a good thing. It's a happy thing. It's a place that respects the people, that provides for the people. That is a free society, free in the good sense of the word. A dictatorship is an evil, oppressive society. And a democracy is a society that aligns with the beliefs, policies, and interests of the Western liberal elite, the media, and the intelligentsia. And a dictatorship is a country that goes against it. A lot of aspects of the social revolution, such as the abolishment of the death penalty, gay marriage, liberalizing abortion, and that sort of thing, were not really bottom-up grassroots movements. Generally speaking, even if they had multiple referendums on the topic like they did in Slovenia, they are opposed by judicial fiat from above. It doesn't really matter who you vote for. It doesn't really matter if there is a referendum, which side wins. It is opposed from above by the courts, and that is democratic. If the people in a particular country or state vote overwhelmingly to define marriage as being between a man and a woman, that is undemocratic. If that referendum is overturned by a court, that is democratic. And you have to understand that, or else none of this really makes any kind of sense. Because once again, if we're talking about popular sovereignty, Putin is far more popular than I think any Western leader. Most Western leaders are widely despised. I mean, you mean to tell me that Keir Starmer is more popular and has more of a democratic mandate than Putin does just because the UK's electoral system gave him a huge majority and is more or less designed to shut out any kind of real opposition to the ruling consensus? I mean, it's just not the case. So to kind of wrap it all together, when it comes to Zelensky, I would argue that he is not a dictator. He's not a dictator because he is aligned with the liberals in the West. He is aligned with the media, the intelligentsia, and the political left in the Western world, and therefore he can, by definition, not be a dictator. The stuff that he does that would go against or be kind of included under the traditional definition of what a dictator is, stuff like canceling elections, ending freedom of speech, banning opposition parties, banning churches, holding people without trial, killing journalists, carrying out foreign terrorist attacks. All of these things are, by definition, not the actions of a dictator because he is within the Ingroup of the leadership of the collective West. Trump is not. He is a part of the outgroup, so therefore he is a dictator, regardless of whether or not he was elected and whether or not he is the legal leader of the United States. And this kind of gets back once again to my definition of democracy. The practical de facto definition of democracy is it's democratic when my side wins. It is generally speaking how it's used in practice. You have the dictionary definition, rule of the majority, or the will of the people, or whatever, but in practice, that's not how the term's used. Democracy is when your side, particularly the political left, wins. Now, there are some conservatives on the center right who do actually think that they're the same thing and do actually have a sincere belief that democracy actually means what the dictionary definition says it means. They are in the minority, though, and that's one of the reasons why I think political discourse in the West has been so confused over the last couple of decades, because conservatives will use terms like dictatorship or democracy or stuff like that in a completely sincere way, invoking images of how most people see it. Whereas when the left uses it, they're largely using it in the non-standard way that is commonly used by the media and the intellectual elites. Anyways, I hope you found that interesting. Like I said, I don't think Zelensky is a dictator by the way that the West defines the term and the way that the West uses the term. He could not be because he is part of the in-group. He is not part of the out-group. Once again, as I said, Bukele can get 84% of the popular vote and still be a dictator. It doesn't matter how free or fair the election is. What matters is that he implemented crime policies that liberals in the West don't like, and that makes it a non-democratic country. So I hope you enjoyed the video. God bless everyone, and more exciting content to come.